Ship wasn't supposed to be here. I pressed myself against the crumbling wall of what used to be a trading outpost, feeling the cold stone bite through my uniform. My left arm hung useless at my side, the wound still bleeding despite the emergency coagulant I'd applied 2 hours ago. The Krellian hunters would find me soon. They always did. I'd destroyed half their fleet at the Battle of Varaxis, executed their prince for war crimes, and now they wanted to watch me die slowly, personally. Commander Thyra Vexashan, the Crimson Hand of the Nexavani Empire, architect of 17 planetary sieges. I'd earned every title, every scar, every sleepless night. But none of that mattered now, bleeding out in an abandoned human colony on some backwater moon whose name I couldn't even remember. I should never have come alone. The footsteps outside grew louder, but they weren't the synchronized march of hunters. Just one person, heavy boots, clumsy almost. I tightened my grip on my plasma blade, ignoring the way my vision swam. If this was how it ended, I'd take at least one more with me. The door scraped open. "Oh wow, are you okay?" I blinked. The figure silhouetted in the doorway wasn't Krellian, wasn't Nexavani. Human, male. Young, maybe mid-20s in their years. He wore civilian clothes, carried no weapons I could see, and his face held nothing but genuine concern. "Stay back," I managed, my translator chip struggling with my weakened state. "I'm dangerous." He completely ignored me and stepped inside, letting the door close behind him. "You're hurt. Hold on, I've got a med kit in my pack." Was this a trick? Humans were supposed to be clever. I'd studied their tactics during the war. But this one just knelt beside me and started rummaging through a worn backpack, his movements unhurried and calm. "Who sent you?" I demanded. He looked up, confused. "Sent me? Nobody. I'm just hiking the old settlement ruins. Archaeological hobby thing." He pulled out a basic medical kit. "I'm Miles, by the way. Can I look at your arm?" Something about this didn't make sense. The pain in my arm flared white hot as Miles carefully peeled back the torn fabric of my sleeve. I'd faced plasma cannons without flinching, but the gentle pressure of his examination made me want to scream. Not from pain, from something else entirely. "This is bad," he said quietly. "You need actual medical attention. The settlement clinic is about 2 miles from here. Can you walk?" "Why would you help me?" The question came out harsher than I intended. "You don't know what I am." "Does it matter?" He was already wrapping my arm with clean bandages from his kit, his hands steady and practiced. "You're hurt. That's enough." In 3 centuries of life, across 100 conquered worlds, no one had ever said anything like that to me. I'd built my reputation on being untouchable, unbreakable, unmoved by sentiment. The Nexovani Empire had shaped me from childhood into the perfect weapon. Emotions were weakness. Mercy was failure. Connection was betrayal. The first time I'd hesitated in combat, my commander had executed my entire training unit to teach me the cost of compassion. I never hesitated again. Until now. Miles worked with quiet efficiency, apparently unconcerned that I could kill him with a thought. My neural implants were still functional, my combat augmentations only partially depleted. One mental command and his heart would stop before he could blink. But I didn't give the command. "You're not from around here," he said, making conversation as if we were meeting at a cafe. "The armor's pretty distinctive. Military?" I almost laughed. Military. Such a quaint term for what I was. "Something like that." "Well, the war's been over for 2 years. You know that, right?" He tied off the bandage. "Not that it matters to me either way. Politics aren't really my thing." The war. Our war. The Nexovani-Terran conflict that had cost billions of lives across 12 systems. I'd personally commanded the assault on New Geneva, had watched their orbital stations burn. This human should hate me, should want me dead. Instead, he offered me water from his canteen. "I have enemies nearby," I said, accepting the water despite myself. "Krellian death squads. They'll kill anyone near me." "Then we should probably get moving." Miles stood, offering his hand. "Clinic's got a secure room. Used to be a bunker during the war. They'll have trouble getting to you there." He was insane. Or stupid. Or possibly the first genuinely kind being I'd encountered in 200 years. I took his hand. The gesture clearly meant something different to humans than to my people. Among the Nexovani, touching hands signified a blood oath, an unbreakable bond of mutual protection. but Miles just pulled me to my feet with easy strength, steadying me when I swayed. Easy, he said. Lean on me if you need to. My pride screamed against it. I'd walked through plasma fire, led armies across dying worlds, stood alone against impossible odds. I didn't lean on anyone. But my body had other ideas, and I found myself accepting his support as we moved toward the door. The settlement ruins sprawled across the valley below us, remnants of humanity's first colony on this moon. The war had left it abandoned but intact, a ghost town of steel and regret. In daylight, I could see the distant shimmer of the Krellian scout ships circling the perimeter. They knew I was here. They were just taking their time. "Those ships," Miles said, following my gaze. "Friends of yours?" "Very much the opposite." "Right." He adjusted his grip on me, thinking, "The clinic's east, but if they're scanning for heat signatures, we could loop through the old water treatment facility. Thermal masking will buy us time." I stared at him. "You know tactical evasion?" He shrugged. "I read a lot." "Come on." We moved through the ruins with painful slowness, my strength fading with each step. Miles kept up a steady stream of quiet observation, pointing out interesting architectural details, speculating about what different buildings had been. It should have been annoying. Instead, I found it oddly anchoring, his voice a tether keeping me focused through the pain. "Why archaeology?" I asked during one rest stop, surprising myself with the question. I never made small talk. "History tells us who we are," he said simply, "or who we could be. These ruins, they're not just buildings. They're stories about people who tried to build something new, far from home. I like preserving those stories. Even stories about war, destruction, especially those. We're supposed to learn from them." He glanced at me, "though I guess sometimes we don't." The Krellian hunters had taught me about war. They'd raided my homeworld when I was young, killed my family, sold me to the Empire's military program. I'd learned to fight because the alternative was death. I'd learned to win because losing meant everyone I protected would die instead. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten there had ever been anything else to learn. The water treatment facility loomed ahead, its massive filtration towers casting long shadows across the valley. Miles led us through a service entrance, navigating the darkness with confidence that suggested he'd explored here before. "So what's your name?" he asked as we descended into the cooler depths. "Or is that classified?" I hesitated. Names held power among my people. To give your true name was to offer vulnerability, to invite connection. I'd been Commander Vexishon for so long, I sometimes forgot I'd once been something else. "Thyra," I said finally. "My name is Thyra." "Thyra," he smiled. "I like it. Sounds strong." 3 syllables. That's all it took for something inside me to crack. We emerged from the facility's far side just as the sun began setting, painting the ruins in shades of amber and gold. The clinic was close now, maybe half a mile. I could see it across the central plaza, its reinforced structure still bearing scorch marks from the war. Then Miles stopped abruptly, his hand tightening on my shoulder. "What is it?" I followed his gaze and felt my blood freeze. Krellian hunters. 6 of them, in full combat armor, weapons drawn. They stood between us and the clinic, clearly waiting. "Is that them?" Miles whispered. I nodded, calculating odds and finding them impossible. Even at full strength, 6 Krellian hunters would be a challenge. Wounded, with a civilian to protect, it was suicide. "Run," I told Miles. "Now. They want me, not you." He didn't move. "What are you going to do?" "What I always do." I pulled my plasma blade, feeling it hum to life despite my depleted power reserves. "Fight." "That's stupid." Miles's voice had gone flat, serious for the first time since we'd met. "You can barely stand." "Then I'll die standing." I pushed away from him, forcing my legs to hold steady. "Go, human. This isn't your battle." "Miles," he said. "What?" "My name is Miles. You used it before, remember?" He reached into his pack. "And I'm not going anywhere." What he pulled out made my breath catch. A human military emergency beacon, the kind that broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously. Illegal on most worlds now, valuable beyond measure. "If I activate this," Miles said calmly, "every remaining Terran defense installation within 100 light-years will know there's a distress signal here, including the UTS Harbinger patrol that passed through this system yesterday." "You'd call your military here? For me?" The absurdity of it struck me hard. I killed thousands of your people. Yeah, probably. He met my eyes. But right now you're just someone who needs help. And those things are trying to kill you. That's enough math for me. The Krellian hunters started advancing, their weapons charging with that distinctive whine that had haunted my nightmares. Miles activated the beacon. The response was immediate. Alarms blared across the settlement as the beacon's signal pierced the atmosphere. The Krellian hunters froze, their tactical implants no doubt screaming warnings about incoming Terran forces. You have maybe 4 minutes before they arrive, Miles said, still impossibly calm. Think you can stay alive that long? Something like a laugh escaped me. With you? Perhaps. We moved together, Miles supporting me as we backed toward a defensible position behind an old monument. The hunters circled, but they were cautious now, aware that killing me had just become complicated. Their leader, identifiable by the red marking on his helmet, stepped forward. His translator crackled to life. Commander Vexashan, you've murdered your last innocent. Today you answer for your crimes. My crimes? The words came out sharper than plasma fire. You raided Nexavan civilian ships for slaves. You executed prisoners. You started this war. We were defending our territory. By killing children? I felt Miles tense beside me, but I couldn't stop now. The words had been locked inside too long. I was 8 years old when your soldiers came. I watched them murder my parents, my sister, everyone I loved. So yes, I became what you made me. A weapon, a monster. But don't pretend your hands are clean. The silence that followed felt like a blade hanging in the air. Then Miles spoke, his voice quiet but clear. My sister died in the attack on New Geneva. I went rigid. New Geneva, my attack, my orders. I destroyed the orbital defenses, cracked open the shields, made the city vulnerable. Thousands had died in the chaos that followed. I know, Miles continued. I recognized your uniform when I first saw you. Nexavani command colors. And I helped you anyway. Why? I couldn't understand it, couldn't process why he'd shown kindness to someone who'd taken so much from him. Because she would have. His voice cracked slightly. Emma, my sister. She was a medic, worked in the civilian hospitals. She died helping evacuate children from the bombardment zone. And I know she would have helped you too, if she'd found you bleeding in those ruins. Because that's who she was. That's who I'm trying to be. The Krellian leader laughed, harsh and bitter. How touching. The prey consoles the predator. Shut up, Miles snapped, surprising everyone. You don't get to mock compassion just because you're afraid of it. Something in his words hit me like a physical blow. Afraid of compassion. Is that what I'd been all these years? Not strong for rejecting connection, but terrified of it? The distant roar of engines cut through the tension. The Terran patrol was arriving ahead of schedule. The Krellian hunters knew they'd lost. Their leader pointed at me one last time. This isn't over, Commander. We'll find you again. Then they were gone, vanishing into the ruins with practiced efficiency. I collapsed against Miles, my legs finally giving out. He lowered me gently to the ground, his hands steady. Help's coming, he said. You're going to be okay. I don't deserve okay. The words came out barely above a whisper. You should have let them take me. That's not how this works. Miles sat beside me, shoulder to shoulder. You don't get to decide you deserve to die just because it's easier than trying to be better. I've done terrible things. Yeah, so what are you going to do about it? The question hung in the air between us as Terran soldiers appeared, their weapons drawn, their faces hard. They recognized me immediately. I could see it in their eyes, the recognition and the rage. But Miles stood up, placing himself between me and their weapons. She's surrendering, he said firmly. She's wounded and surrendering. Anyone who wants to shoot her goes through me first. The lead soldier, a woman with captain's insignia, studied Miles with obvious confusion. Sir, do you know who this is? Yeah, Miles said. I know. The captain looked at me, then back at Miles, then sighed. This is going to be a lot of paperwork. They took me into custody, but gently, and Miles stayed with me the whole time. In the clinic's medical bay, with Terran doctors working to save my life and Terran guards watching my every breath, he sat in the corner and just existed. A solid presence in a world that had suddenly become uncertain. Why? I asked him once, when the pain medication made honesty easier than pride. Why did you do all this? He thought for a long moment. My sister used to say that the only way to end a war is to refuse to keep fighting it. I never really understood what she meant until today. I'm still going to prison, probably for the rest of my life. Probably, he agreed. Does that change whether you deserve to be helped today? It didn't. That was the thing I was only beginning to understand. Mercy wasn't about deserving. It was about choosing to see someone's humanity, even when they'd forgotten it themselves. The Terran authorities transferred me to their capital world 3 days later. There would be a trial, testimony, accountability for everything I'd done. I deserved all of it. But Miles visited me before they took me away. He brought books, history texts from a dozen different worlds, stories about people who'd done terrible things and then spent their lives trying to make amends. Thought you might want reading material, he said. Prison's probably boring. You're not afraid I'll escape? Come after you? He smiled. No, I think you're done running. He was right. I'd spent 200 years running from the scared 8-year-old girl who'd watched her world burn, running into war, into violence, into anything that let me forget that I'd once been capable of feeling. Miles had reminded me what it felt like to be seen as something other than a weapon. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in centuries, for treating me like a person. That's what you are, he said simply. Everything else is just what happened to you. They took me away in chains and I didn't fight. I had a lot to answer for, a lot to make right if such a thing was even possible. But for the first time in 200 years, I felt something I'd thought lost forever. Hope. 6 months into my sentence, I received my first letter from Miles. He'd been granted permission to correspond with me, had advocated for my access to educational programs, had testified at my trial about my surrender and cooperation. His letter was simple. Updates about his archaeological work, questions about Nexavani history, musings about the future. And at the end, a single line that I read over and over until I'd memorized it. Everyone deserves a chance to become who they could have been, even people who forgot they could be anything at all. I kept that letter and all the ones that followed. They reminded me that somewhere in the universe, someone had looked at the monster I'd become and decided to see the person underneath. That was worth living for.